Hey there, YouTube. My name's Sky, and this is my AL-Vista 3B. So many of you on Instagram and YouTube have been asking questions about it ever since I released my short video. And at the last time I checked on Instagram, the view count was up over 1.3 million and 75 or 77,000 likes. Thank you all so much. Y'all are awesome. I figured that only a handful of people would have found interest in this camera, but thank you, truly. In this video, I'm going to go through a lot of the steps that I took to actually bring this camera into working condition, and also manufacturing my own film stock here at the house. Well, not really my own stock, but cutting down large pieces of film to be able to fit in this camera. And then what all I did for parts manufacturing and stuff like that. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail on that. I am just going to briefly go over what I did, and then you can figure it out yourself. Or if you are interested, just leave a comment and I'll make another video about the specific thing you want me to. I don't want to make it too long. I really don't want to have an hour-long video because there's a lot of details that went into manufacturing so many different things for this camera. So without further ado, let's just get right into it. One of the biggest issues with this camera in particular was the lack of accessories that was sold with it. Originally, this camera would have had a little pouch for both the Waterhouse stops and the fans. So for me, I had to actually go out of my way and find the measurements to get as close to as possible. Thanks to another YouTuber by the name of Old Parson, he generously gave me the measurements to an original set of 3B fans in the comment section of his video. So all of these are made because of him. Thankfully, he was willing to do that because not many people who I've talked to, or at least attempted to get in touch with, was willing to talk about anything about the camera. They tested it, it was a novelty, and they moved on. So if you saw my Instagram video, then you know that I used the biggest one, which gives about a 9-second exposure time. Assuming it's a 9-inch film negative, that should mean that it's a 1-second exposure, like a general 1-second exposure, what you would expect if you set your camera to 1 second. But it clearly takes 9 seconds to traverse the whole length of the camera, or to be able to traverse the whole length of the film on the back. The other thing, like I said, was Waterhouse stops. I did not get a set of Waterhouse stops with mine. The lens comes out similar to a normal bayonet mount. It has a pin right here that slots into the front, goes in, and twists and locks in place. See if I can get this out. This is one of the ones I manufactured, and I'm already having trouble with the paint coming off. So I recently purchased some brass blackener that's supposed to corrode the brass to a kind of a black finish to hopefully keep the reflections down on the optical tube, which in this case is an 80 millimeter, approximately 80 millimeter rapid rectilinear style lens. Bosch and Lomb, I believe, is the manufacturer of the lens. I'm not positive on exactly the manufacturer. It's hard to get information for this stuff, but if I remember reading about it, it was a Bosch and Lomb rapid rectilinear, which is similar to what you would find on the postcard camera from Kodak, the Kodak Folding Brownie 3A. To change the speeds, to change the fans out, it's just a friction fit system. There's a shaft at the bottom of the front cover of the camera that you remove and insert a new one. So I'm going to demonstrate that now. So as you can see, I just have a hole with a slot cut into it, and it's 1/16 thick brass on a 1/4-inch brass rod that was turned down with a drill bit and some sandpaper. I don't have anything fancy, not a lathe or anything, but that's how these were manufactured. At the bottom of the camera, you have this spot right here. That's where you're supposed to put it in. This winds it up. And then this is the shutter button, of course. That is the fastest speed with a fan installed. I found that if I run it without a fan installed, it makes a really bad sound that I'm not sure if it's damaging it or not, so I just try not to do that. If I want a faster shutter speed with the camera, I will just move the entire mechanism over by hand until it locks in place. And this gives it about a 1/100th of a second exposure time. Quite a quick exposure. All right, I'm going to go ahead and take the front cover off so you can see the mechanism work on the backside. On the backside, you'll notice that there is a door here. This door actually prevents any light coming through. It's going to be difficult to show, but once it gets to a specific position, once it hits this part, it will actually close it so it helps to keep from exposing the film inside so you can move around. Otherwise, the optical train within here is exposed while it's open. As soon as this flap is open, that's it. It's exposing. This opens up the moment it goes all the way over here and touches this as well. So as soon as it's there, it's in the open position, which could potentially do some light damage. But because of the fact that this part here, this is just one of the spool holders, it should prevent it from doing anything. I've seen people talk about it online to put the lens cap on when you're not using it. It's probably for best practice. I haven't had any issues with it yet. So okay. And again, that one's really cooking. All right. While we have this open, I'll go ahead and pull out. This is a 122 spool. So this spool came out of either it came out of this camera because I got two spools with it, or it came out of a 122 film camera, more than likely one of my folding brownies. I found a website that indicated that they were damn near identical. Both 101 and 122 have the same spool size. The main difference between the two film stocks is 122 is 3¼ inch wide, while the 101 stock is 3.5 inches. This is one of the carriers that has one for each side. If you got one of these cameras and you didn't have access to the resources like I do, or the time to want to do it, you can take regular sheet film and load this camera. As you can see, there is a slot on the back here that goes the whole length all the way around. That slot will allow you to tuck a sheet of film with a bit of backing paper. I would suggest having something behind it when you insert it. The way I did it with one of my original shots was that I taped a piece of x-ray film to a piece of black construction paper and then inserted it in there. That way it keeps it from moving around and also helps to keep it pressed into the position, because there's a bit of a gap here. Hard to tell. There's quite a bit of a gap in that slot, so it's not going to be perfectly pushing it where it should. Coming around to the back side, I'll swing this around. This, for whatever reason, is an indicator on the film. You're supposed to be able to push this in, and a spike in the back there is supposed to stamp the film so you know where to cut. I figure after you develop, you should know where to cut, but that's what the description I got online was for. There is a manual indicator back here for using to tell you what shot you're on. It looks like the original ones were supposed to do, I think, 5 or 6 shots total, but you just move this by itself. It's not connected to any of the mechanism inside. It's all done manually. This top side here, this is for half frame control. Believe it or not, these cameras had half frame control. They'd make a 3.5 inch by 4.5 inch negative, or the full 3.5 by 9. This mechanism here is actually connected inside to a wheel. That actually makes contact with the backing paper and film, and that would actually indicate where you are. That's how you know exactly what frame you're on, or how, not necessarily what frame you're on, but how to know exactly where the next frame is starting. As you rotate the front part here, as you rotate the film advance knob, this will rotate itself. You can actually preload it to get it into position for whenever you're ready. As you rotate this and film's going through it, it will actually go and rotate. If you're doing a half frame, you stop at the 5. And if you're doing a full frame, you go all the way around to 10. For every rotation, that's another frame, another full frame at least. On the back side, my particular model was altered for some reason. Somebody drilled a hole and they put a window in it. I think they were trying to modify it to get 120 film to work. I'm not positive. But normally you wouldn't see this on any of the other AL-Vistas except for maybe the baby AL-Vista, which is a 120 film variant of this style of camera. On the back side, you have a little cubby hole for holding your fans and Waterhouse stops. Very convenient. I wanted to try this earlier, but I didn't. Yeah, and apparently also a place for you to store a spare roll of film. This is a very useful and handy little compartment to have. My particular AL-Vista does not have the original nameplate, or the original identification plate, so I have no idea who or when this was manufactured, who it was inspected by, or any sort of information like that. Instead, I have a handwritten card on here about some instructions for exposure, similar to what it would have been, but so I believe this was modified by a previous owner. Somebody told me that it might be a prototype camera that was supposed to take 120 film, but when I measured the film gate, it seems like it's exactly the same style film gate as every other AL-Vista 3B. One other thing that I wanted to go over with on as far as the half frame goes, since I just mentioned it, in order to engage the half frame, you would lift this up and turn the dial towards the front of the camera, and inside that would move a lever that would hit the door that would lock off exposure. At the beginning I talked about how as the arms swung and it hit those two tabs, well, in the middle of the exposure it would hit this, and that would cut off the exposure to half frame. So that's how the half frame worked. Ooh, yeah, that's that sound I was talking about. When there's nothing installed, it sounds like it's wallowing out something in there, a bushing or something. I should talk about that now that I've brought it up. Oil points on this are here. This is one of the main ones right here. Get it on the camera. This is the main one that I oiled, and it's already pretty, the hole itself is larger than the shaft is. So I'm guessing that might be part of it. The other is this inside here on the back side of this. It's hard to show, but there are oil points of the rods that stick up through. Those rods are what actually need to be oiled and maintained in order for it to come back to life. A lot of times when you get these, you'll move it into a position like that and it won't move. It'll just stay stuck there. That's because the gears are all sticky, the oil's all dried up, grease is gone, so on and so forth. So that's the maintenance kind of side of it. You see that other rod there moving, that's another oil point. Move those as you're oiling them, and that will just moving the winding knob as you oil them. Those will get it to come back into spec to be able to actually function again. Running out of words. I hate that sound. I'm gonna stop now. The only other aside I wanted to go over about this camera that's different from most of what I found, I can't find another AL-Vista similar to this that uses a pill style bubble level on top. Most of them have a bullseye level. I'll go grab my Panoramic Kodak to demonstrate what I'm talking about. There was either a marble or a fluid filled capsule that had basically an air bubble in it. And as you moved the camera around to get it in level, you wanted to get it as center as possible. It just like any other level that you would use on a camera, this was just pre-built in. It was very, very necessary for swinging lens panoramics to be perfectly level because of the way they expose the film. There's a particular cigaring effect that happens in images. In this image, you won't really see the cigaring effect that I'm referring to because both images were taken at a very level, made sure that it was very level so that the horizon would be a straight line through the center of the image. On, say, this center image here of this church, you'll see that it kind of has an arc to it. That was my attempt at trying to point up slightly to make sure I got the whole church in frame, but that was to a detriment, and that's how I learned that I'm supposed to keep the camera as perfectly level as possible. So, and if you can see here, another straight, it's completely straight through and through. One of my infrared images I shot with the 3B, you can also see a cigaring effect happening with the foreground in the image. So in this one, you'll see that there's a bit of a cigaring effect to it because the ditch line here actually kind of curves along right here. And then it gets skinny here and it gets fat here. That's the cigaring effect that most, if not pretty much, I believe all swing lens cameras have. You'll see a similar effect in a very wide angle lens. As far as accessories goes, the only thing that I've made so far is a filter holder for a 27.5mm round filter. I got these filter glasses off eBay from a company out of China. It's just perfect. It's at just the perfect size that I can use my FDM printer to print them and then glue them in place. These slip onto the front of the lens, and then I just pull it out whenever I'm not using it. This one particularly is for 720 nanometers. This is for the infrared images I was taking. I have some more colored filters on order: orange, red, and yellow. More than likely I'll end up using the red and yellow mostly, but I thought I'd try an orange as I've never actually done that. So how did I cut the film to be perfectly straight and even? Well, I tried a number of different methods, and the one that worked really well for me was just glass. I went to my local auto glass supplier and I asked them to cut me a piece of 1/4-inch sheet soda glass or whatever, just plain glass, plain, not tempered, nothing, just a big old piece of glass. This glass gets laid on top of the film, and then I just line it up to the edge and make my cut. It's 40 inches long by 3.5 wide to make the to be able to make each roll of film. Funny enough, every time I make a roll of film, or every time I cut a 40-inch strip of the full width, I get 2 rolls of the 101 film and 1 roll of 120 film. That's actually about 6 to 8 inches too long. I want to find a method where I can cut 60 inches at a time, and then I would end up with about 6 exposures of the 101, and then I'd end up with 2 rolls of 120, so I'm not actually wasting 8 inches of film every time I cut the spare 120 roll. On the subject of film, let's talk about the aviation film. Aerial film, aviation film, I'm probably messing that up. This is 250 feet of 9 7/16 inch wide AGFA Avefot Pan 200. It's a 200 ISO film that was specifically designed for use in, I'm guessing, mapping and maybe reconnaissance. It's a leftover from when we used to use planes to map things out and photograph landscapes over nowadays where it's mostly satellites. This particular roll expired in 2013. There are other rolls I've seen online that expired 2012 and 2014. I haven't seen anything newer that expired any newer than that. That's probably the closest it is. The film has a bit of base fog. Whether that's the developer I used or just because of storage, more likely it was not stored really well. I purchased it from a seller out of India, and they weren't very clear. I tried to ask questions, but they didn't really respond well, or there was something lost in translation, so I didn't try too hard either. As far as the backing paper that I used a backing paper that does not say it's acid free or that it was inert. I couldn't find a black backing paper that was considered acid free without it being in large, very expensive rolls. I found a US seller off Amazon that sold some that said it was for craft projects, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's archival. I wouldn't let my film sit in it for too long because I do not know what binders they use in the paper. It could have some negative effects on the film. So I usually roll a day or so ahead of time before I go out and use it to photograph. It just comes on a roll like this. I lay it out. The width that I usually cut it to is 3 and 11/16 inch wide. That just seems to fit just perfectly inside of the 122 spool. And yeah, that's the paper I'm using. It's not perfectly light tight. It's not a daylight loading cartridge like what is supposed to go inside of it. You can see this is what my light leak problem was, because that back window I didn't cover, and obviously light was getting through and exposing the film. So it's not perfectly opaque. I had thought about coating this in some sort of like acrylic paint because that's both flexible and can become opaque, but I was worried that it may not bind properly to the paper and it could lift off. I'm also not 100% positive if acrylic paint is completely inert or not. As far as development goes with developing the film, I used a number of developers with very little success, mainly the Pyro style of developers. PyroCAD HD I had issue with. I believe it needs to be hotter and needs to have a lot more agitation than what I was willing to put into it. I didn't get an image off of PyroCAD HD for more than an hour at room temperature of about 70 to 72 degrees Fahrenheit. 510 Pyro I had better success with. It was more of a 20 to 25 minute, but again, a lot of agitation went into trying to get it to develop, and it still was losing a lot of shadow detail. I needed a lot more light than what I was rating it at. And at the time, when I do most of my testing, I test with D76 because it's a quick and easy and cheap developer to use. But that didn't work very well. It was overdeveloped, and there's a huge base fog whenever I do D76, but it's the only one that works quick enough for my patience level. When I have better time and I've got this whole craft figured out and I'm able to go back, I'm going to go back and do more 510 Pyro developing with the Agfa Ave Photo. But for right now, my development times are 15 minutes at 20 degrees centigrade or 70 degrees Fahrenheit, 1:1 D76 with agitation for the first 15 seconds and then 5 inversions every 30 seconds. That seems to actually get a decent image every single time. One of the last accessories I want to talk about before I wrap this video up is a pair of night vision goggles. These are not high quality. They're a kid's toy from 2010, but they're about 20 to 30 bucks. And this is what I use in my darkroom to be able to cut down the film and be able to line up everything. I probably brazed over that a little too quickly, but it's very difficult to line up glass and film and not cut yourself. So in order to cut this stuff, I use this. There are two distinct modes on it. One is probably going to blind the camera. One is in a 900 nanometers and the other is closer to 850. I think that changes it to that one. So using this in the 900 nanometer or the higher version, there's no visible light that comes out, so it's only going to be in higher infrared. The sensitivity cutoff for this film is 750 to 760 nanometers. So there's at least a full 100 plus nanometers between it at the low end and at the high end, using it closer to the 900, there's 250. So that is where I'd like to stay at with it, is to stay as far away from its sensitivity as possible. And also probably lost some sensitivity because of how old it is. The other accessory was I had to find a way to develop the film myself. So I created my own development reel for the Patterson 3-reel tank. This is downloadable. You can get it off my Thingiverse or printables. I'll have a link in the description. But this is not the best. I'm still working on it. But if you want to start doing it now, you can print the two pieces. You can print the two pieces off Thingiverse or printables. And they loosely fit together. They're not going to snap together. I wanted to have the ability to rock the film on as I'm loading it, similar to the way you do for 120. You just rotate one side at a time to try to work it on. But it needs to be on this tube in order for that to function properly. So you have to have the Patterson tube. And to keep it all squished together, I like to take a normal 135 roll or a spool and put it on top. That helps to keep everything submerged so nothing floats up as well. So that's the only other thing. If there's any other questions, something that I didn't leave, if there's something I left out for this video, please feel free to comment here or on my Instagram. I'll leave, again, links for everything's going to be in the description. This is kind of my passion, working on this type of photography equipment, going back in time and bringing stuff back from the dead. Stuff that's sold as is, not working on eBay, and then spending time figuring out how to work it. Or my favorite one was taking the Panoramic Kodak #1. I had to use the original 1903 patent for it, or not the original patent, but a copy of the 1903 patent for this camera to be able to figure out why the shutter wouldn't fire. So, and this is another swing lens Panoramic. This one does a 6x18. So, this is my passion. This is kind of the projects I like to do. I like panoramics and macro photography. So if you're interested, leave a like, a subscription, ask anything you want in the comments. I'll try and help you out. But I think that's it for this episode, the first episode.